Professor Helen Rees is one of our country's top female scientists. She and her husband, fellow Dr. Fazel Randera, fought against the inequalities of the health system under apartheid South Africa and endured persecution as a mixed-race couple. A former head of the Medicines Control Council, today Professor Rees heads up the Wits Reproductive Health and HIV Institute. In 2001, she was made an officer of the British Empire for her contribution to global health. Health game changer, mother and doctor, Professor Helen Rees has lived a life of passion and purpose.
Professor Helen Rees, so lovely to be talking with you today, and thank you so much for having us in this wonderful institute that you've established. Now, you were born in the United Kingdom to a very politically and socially aware family, really. What was it like growing up in that family?
I think that one of the primary influences was my father, who was this very strong Welsh socialist, you know, from the day he was born to the day he died. And he came from a family of mine workers and trade unionists. So he had a very strong belief in what was right and what was wrong, a very strong belief in trade union movements and the rights of workers. And my mother, on the other side, was a strong Methodist and a liberal who had this sort of compassion. So it was nice, it was a balance, and I think it definitely framed the way that we saw the world.
Does that mean you were a particularly militant youngster growing up in that kind of home?
I actually was, yes. I was. I mean, I remember sneaking away to listen to Peter Hain, who was on the Stop the Box tour when I was 15, getting on buses and telling my parents I was going somewhere completely different and going to listen to Peter Hain. And actually the meeting getting disrupted by a right-wing element, you know, and me having to sort of hide. You know, I think that framework was always there.
You know, it's very interesting that you talk about that, because clearly you are a brilliant woman. You must have been an exceptional child. What were your school days like?
They were, I think, quite ordinary. I went to an ordinary primary school, and I went through the state school system in the United Kingdom. I think I was very talkative. I kind of talked my way through school, I suspect, to some extent. Both my parents worked, so, you know, my life was going home with a key and opening the door myself and going on buses to school because it was a long distance, even from the age of 8. Being in classes in those days where I was in classes of 50 children. So, you know, it was an ordinary school life. I think I was fortunate to go to a good secondary school, and I think that speaks to the importance of education for women.
Just how big was your family?
Small. No, I have one sister, but both of us became doctors.
That's interesting. Was that your mother's influence?
That was her influence. You know, she was a frustrated doctor. She taught cookery and had always wanted to be a doctor, but then the war came and she was young and there was no money in the family, so she ended up teaching and was a good cook and a good seamstress, neither of which I've inherited.
That's a pity. But there are other fantastic things you can do. I mean, after school you went to study at Cambridge, but interestingly you combined these two aspects of your upbringing as well. You've got a medical degree, of course, and then you go for a master's degree in political or social and political sciences. How did the combination of those mold you as an individual?
Well, you know, I was fortunate. Cambridge University, I went to an all-women's college. There were 3 women's colleges there in those days and about 20 men's colleges. So I was fortunate because the degree that you do in medicine at Cambridge allows you to do a master's degree in anything you want, in the whole, so you can choose what you want. And I did social and political sciences. I did a thesis looking at women and women's health. We set up a thing called Reds in Medicine, it was called, but it was Medicine in Society, where we got a whole lot of people talking about the context of medicine in the larger world and how social context determines health.
You also went on to begin your medical training. You were busy with that in London in the 1980s, and that was when you met your political activist husband. Well, he wasn't your husband at that point,
no.
But what was it that attracted you to each other? Your mutual bent towards activism, perhaps?
Yes, I mean, it was interesting. It was my first intern job, and we were in the south of London. And before I ever met him, I had all these people describing him to me, saying, "Oh, you're really going to get on, you two, you're really going to get on." He was on holiday. The first time I ever set eyes on him, I mean, he does what he frequently does in life, which he came through a door laughing with a very loud laugh. And he was massively striking individual, very tall, long dark hair, long black beard, and imposing as a personality. And I think it was, we had a political allegiance. I've been very involved and interested in the anti-apartheid and very concerned about what was happening and what could be done. So I think we rapidly got together, as they say, and the rest was history. We first went to work in Zimbabwe immediately after independence, and we came down here. We came down a couple of times, drove across the border, and I mean, it was, I was a little Welsh white woman crossing the border and coming into apartheid South Africa in a mixed relationship into a completely different milieu. I mean, I was working in Zimbabwe, so I had that as a backdrop. There were many things that were shocking, but there were many things that were very funny. Whether it was fighting off friends in the street who were not white, who were other colours, and were trying to kiss me and saying, "You can't kiss in the street." I mean, there were things I really didn't understand, and but it obviously made an impression. I think, astonishingly so. The many friends that I met during those early years are still friends, and everyone welcomed you in. It wasn't that they said, "Oh, she's foreign. Do we trust her? What is she going to be doing in the context of our struggle?" It wasn't like that at all. It was, you were immediately accepted. You were part of a broad resistance movement that was going on within the community.
What do you feel when you look back at those years? There are images of you heavily pregnant, working in Alexandra Township. What do you feel was your greatest contribution to the struggle at that time?
When Fazel and I came back into South Africa, we joined NAMDA, which was the National Medical and Dental Association. And at that time, there was an emergence of really three very important anti-apartheid structures. There was a health workers structure, there was one for psychologists and social workers, and there was NAMDA, which was for doctors and dentists in particular. And so we joined NAMDA, and that, I think, was an incredibly important crucible. Though that movement, which was opposing apartheid health in South Africa, was extraordinarily important. And I think through that, I managed to do something because of NAMDA, things that by oneself none of us could have done. We did it because of the power of that organization and the collective of those three organizations.
But that almost officially turned you into a political activist. Yes. I mean, did you intend to become a political activist? Was that the idea?
When I look back, I don't think I was very good at setting those kind of life targets. Some of these things happen, but I was already politically active and politically aware, but becoming a political activist, I think, was such a normal progression if you found yourself here. I mean, I worked with, working with colleagues, we were looking after detainees who'd been tortured. And I worked with one colleague who was a general practitioner. We worked together, and eventually it got too much for us. We were seeing too many victims of torture. And then through these various structures and through NAMDA, we set up a whole outfit that really formally looked after both the physical health, the mental health, the social well-being of people coming out of prison who had been politically detained. So yes, I became a political activist, very strongly so, but I did it very much in the context of a growing movement. When you see that level of injustice, when you've got a child's life in front of you, you don't hesitate. Who would hesitate but to say you are going to actually save this child?
News that moves. ENCA.com.